It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
I present the letter from the King to you.
Thank you very much.
That was February and now we have a date. President Trump will make his unprecedented second state visit in September. Subsidies for electric cars are back. Is it a good use of taxpayers' money?
Hope is on the way, change is on the way, and it's us who will bring it. Thank you very much, Durham.
And how successful could a new left-wing party be? Joining us today, Labour MP Emily Darlington, Conservative MP and Shadow Justice Minister Kieran Mullen, former Labour National Executive Committee member Mish Rahman and political strategist Joe Tanner. This is Politics Live. Now, let's start by looking at this BBC headline, which is confirming that President Trump will be hosted by the King at Windsor during his second state visit. This is something that hasn't happened before. Normally, presidents on their second visit get tea. They don't get a state visit, but this is going to be different. So, Emily, do you think that President Trump should be getting this unprecedented second state visit?
I think America is an absolute key ally, especially on defence. And we see how dangerous the world is. We don't get to elect who is the president of the US. He wouldn't have been my first choice, but he is the president. And therefore, we do need to treat him with the respect that that accords. And we've seen how successful these state visits can be. Macron last week, the defence deals that we were doing with Macron really means that we can protect Britain, and hopefully we'll have the same success with that visit.
But it does go a step further than just, you know, offering him something that others have had. No one else has ever had this.
Well, because it's the second one, I guess you're alluding to. For me, you know, he's had that period in between where he wasn't the president. It feels like a very new presidency. I don't really worry. It's where the royals come into their own is when they're able to do that diplomacy with us in order to get the best deal for the UK.
Kieran, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Emily. They're such an important partner for us, particularly in relation to defence, and the world is an incredibly dangerous place right now. And there is this slightly unusual pattern to his presidency, which I think makes room for that different approach in terms of having a state visit. I can't think of recent memory of someone who's been a president, they're not president, and come back again. So I think you can justify it, and actually we should do whatever is going to help us solidify our relationship with them.
Mish?
I think it's interesting that both the panellists say that the world is in a dangerous place. I think Donald Trump makes the world a dangerous place. I think he's a threat to democracy, he's a threat to women, he's a threat to migrants. He incited an insurrection when he was president last time. And I don't think we should be rolling out red carpet for a man who has no regard for human rights, just like he doesn't. I think this is a propaganda trip. This is one for his own publicity, for the most publicity-hungry man on earth. And I understand the relationship and between the US and Britain, but just recently he bullied the UK on tariffs. Starmer, Badenoch, Farage, I just think they're going out of their way to kiss his backside, and I don't think the British people, at their expense as well, really want him to come here.
So even though he's the American president, and as we were saying, obviously we don't get to elect him, that's who the American people have elected.
Exactly, but this is an unprecedented visit in the way that it's being done, and it's at the cost of the taxpayer as well, and I'd like to know what it's going to cost us.
Joe, what do you think?
I think there's a few things. I think others are right. There's a lot of interesting points here. We also have had a change of head of state ourselves, so it's actually a different host because we have a new king. But there is a sting in the tail for this because the date has been quite cleverly orchestrated. So what he doesn't get out of this is his opportunity to address Parliament, which actually has been afforded to other heads.
Yeah, so he arrives on the 17th of September for those 3 days, and Parliament MPs, at least, they go off for the break for conference recess.
What a surprise. There's
the day before.
Recess. Exactly. So suddenly there isn't an opportunity for any potential backlash from parliamentarians, any boycott, anything difficult within the Palace of Westminster that could have occurred. There could have been folks that had decided to sort of make their feelings known. But I do think there is a price you have to pay for diplomacy, and there are a lot of big issues on the table. And if that means he comes again and we have further conversations, then I think Keir Starmer on the world stage has been pretty impressive compared to domestic Keir. I think international Keir's been more successful. And I think if this is part of that piece of work that needs to continue, then I think we should be getting behind it.
Emily, there are some, Nigel Farage one of them, saying that Parliament should be recalled so that Donald Trump can address both houses of Parliament. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think he's accepted those dates very much knowing what is happening here. So, you know, I don't think everyone has to address both houses of Parliament. That's not always part of a state visit. I think more importantly is for him coming over, building that relationship with both our royal family and, as you said, that we have a new king, but also with Keir Starmer. And we know very much for somebody like Donald Trump, it is about relationships in terms of being able to do it. And that's how we've got the lowest tariffs in the country, in the world, because we've actually been able to build that relationship, and Keir has played that very, very well.
Well, it built the relationship, but we're still worse off than we were prior to Keir Starmer coming in.
And better off than most other countries.
There are still tariffs in place that were not in place previously. So that's another reason why we do actually need to keep talking to him, so we can actually get a genuine breakthrough on the tariffs in terms of the comprehensive deal they said they were going to get. They haven't actually really got that. We're still left with trade barriers that were not there before Keir Starmer started his negotiation.
Do you think
worse
so?
Off.
Your Conservative colleague Suella Braverman says that Parliament should be recalled so that he can do this.
In
Do you think
principle,
he should?
I'm not against us doing him being allowed to address both houses. In principle,
would you come back for
it? Yeah, absolutely. I would come back if that was a decision that was taken. It's not just, it's also the Speaker has to agree with that. And I actually think, to be fair, I think his FaceTime with the royal family is what I think Trump particularly enjoys. I think I would prioritise that sort of event where I think he feels he'll get great benefit from it. But I'm not against it in principle. And that's kind of the criticism of America is so easily done by people who are not in any position of influence or power and can just say what they want. When actually America keeps you safe, keeps me safe, keeps every single one of us safe every single day because of a really important strategic role it plays across the whole world. And that kind of rhetoric is so cheap because actually you only get to enjoy the freedoms. All of us in the West are part of NATO, largely because America supports our defence and supports us being free countries. You know, that is the reality of what you benefit from America. And so we have to be kind to someone.
I think that's so patronising when you're telling me that I benefit from this.
You
do? When most of the world is put in a dangerous place. America has been quite unpopular around the world because of the wars that it leads around the world, the unsuccessful wars as well, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Syria, and whether it's backing the war in Palestine with the Israelis. So I just do not accept that because America happens to be confronting these, and Britain seems to be a junior ally in this, that this keeps us safe. It brings problems home, and we've seen this with terrorism and all sorts. So it's just cuckoo what you're saying.
How do you think Iran, North Korea, Russia would behave if America wasn't a security partner for the West? How do you think they would behave? Do you think they would just quietly put away their toys and be friendly to everybody?
I don't think they are a threat to us. Iran and North Korea are a threat to us right now in this country. What are they threatening us with? What are they threatening us with?
You don't think that Iran has...
If you could tell me what they're threatening us with, and I'll tell you.
Do look up the security intelligence reports where Iran consistently plots to disrupt this country, has carried out cyber warfare against this country. Russia has carried out cyber warfare against this country. North Korea has carried out cyber warfare against this country. All of those countries are continually trying to develop their offensive capabilities. They are constantly seeking to undermine the settled Western democracies. And America plays an enormous outsized role in not allowing them to do that. And so, as I said, you benefit from that protection. And I think we just have to have a little bit of respect for what American taxpayers do to keep all of us safe.
Mitch, do you think that the MPs would respect the President if he were to give this address to Parliament, if it were to happen?
I think what Kieran is just saying, it just shows how both these parties are out of touch with the people, where Kieran's just said he's willing to leave constituency work to come and see Donald Trump, or just not even see Donald Trump, to bear witness to Donald Trump's would-be parliamentary address. There's issues going on in constituencies which they're not responding to. People are struggling to make ends meet. People are struggling to pay bills.
But do you think, as the government, as the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, he has to welcome the leader of America, doesn't he?
I don't know why he has to. Why does he have to welcome Donald Trump? What is he welcoming when I've just said that this person doesn't respect women, this person doesn't respect migrants, he doesn't respect democracy. He wants to lock up political opponents. He wants to deport people of different ethnicities who are politically opposed to him. how is that? Why are Britain and a progressive Labour Party Prime Minister, so-called, rolling out the red carpet?
Joe, do you think there's political dangers here for Keir Starmer or not?
Any dealings with any world leader, there are always going to be political risks. And with Donald Trump, let's face it, any given day we wake up and get on with our day, and then a few hours later we find out what Donald Trump thinks because he's got up and decided how he feels about the day and what he's going to do. But the reality of the world order and the way that the West works, the way that we work with Europe, is that we have many allies. We don't always like everything they do, but that is the reality of doing politics. That's the reality of leading. You just have to engage in conversation. And I'd much rather have Keir Starmer in a room having conversations about the difficult stuff and the stuff that perhaps is a bit easier, or perhaps now and again he has to turn a blind eye to things. I still think that's better than not being in the room at all. I think that's just the reality of leading.
I think there's also the point that, that quite frankly, you have to be in the room to have those disagreements. And you've seen those disagreements happening on online safety. We take a very different view from America on online safety. That is a red line for us. Also on agricultural standards, we take a very different view on agricultural standards, and we're not willing to lessen those, to have the chlorinated chicken. But you have to be in the room to have those discussions. And if you want to influence some of the behaviour and decisions, like Nish is saying, we absolutely have to be in the room to be able to do that.
OK, let's talk about electric cars and whether the government is going to announce more grants. According to the Sunday Telegraph, they are. Have a look at this headline. Labour to spend millions on electric car handouts. They're saying that there's going to be around £700 million worth of money offered and also charging upgrades to combat sluggish sales. So, Emily, or the panel really, has anyone got an electric car? What are the upsides and downsides?
I don't have an electric car, but I represent Milton Keynes and I was deputy leader of Milton Keynes Council. We have the most electrical charge points of any city per head of population.
That still didn't encourage you to buy one?
Well, because I believe in running out the car that I have. Mine's a 2014, it's still running, so I'll keep running it until it runs out. But the reality is we need to be making those transfers over. We've seen the investment that comes into Milton Keynes as a result of being open to that, and that could be available right across the country. So
£700 million, you think that is a good use of public money?
I do, because we have to make that transition over to net zero. We've had the hottest summer. We've now been told that that is absolutely the new reality, the new norm. We've got to make that transition, and we've got to be helping people to do that.
Kieran, do you agree?
Well, I also agree with running out a car to the ground, but I did run mine out to the ground a few weeks ago, so I actually do have an electric car. And I have to say, it's been a learning curve, and you do realise how much further I think we've got to go on infrastructure for it to be this mass movement. And I think the subsidies, the question on all these things is not, do we get to electric high percentage ownership? Of course we will. On all these things, it's timing. And I think anything where we're using taxpayers' money in the short term, I just don't think we can afford it right now, unfortunately. We're at a reasonable place compared to the rest of the world. We're actually ahead of most of the rest of the world when it comes to electric vehicle ownership. And I think you've got to be careful in making sure that infrastructure can take it. There was a sudden splurge on people buying it. I find it challenging, actually, sometimes already. I don't think it's the best use of taxpayers' money. I think it's this kind of overzealous attempt to hit certain targets on net zero. All of that, the sooner you hit them, the more it's going to cost you short term. We don't have the money, as we know, with Labour's kind of wrecking of our economy.
Emily, you're being overzealous.
Finances.
I don't think we are being overzealous. I think we're trying to make up for lost time in terms of what happened under 14 years of the last government, who really pulled back on wind, on solar, on everything. Some of this money is for infrastructure. That's exactly what they're giving grants for, to make sure that we can build up that infrastructure. So you're pretty much contradicting yourself. And
well, I think the £700 million
subsidies. That's the issue.
£700 million is for grants. So there is going to be £63 million for charging infrastructure, which is what you're talking about. It's quite a lot, £700 million on the grants.
It is. It's quite a lot, but we do have to. Transport is the second biggest emissions. The other bit is housing. So we're also going to warm house grants, which will help people put the insulation in their homes. We have to look at those major areas where we're getting the CO2 emissions, and we have to help people do it. We can't let them just do it on their own. We have to support them.
But what Emily's done is what Labour MPs always do on these issues. They come on and just make out everything was terrible. So we were the fastest decarbonising economy in the G7, the fastest decarbonising economy in the G7. So no one beats in the G7. And on car ownership, as I said, on overall electric vehicle ownership, you've inherited from us a situation where we're ahead of the US, We're ahead of Japan, we're ahead of the EU average, we're ahead of Germany. So we actually did do a decent job, but you've got to pace these things correctly, and that gave us that wriggle room to pull back slightly.
Mish, do you think this is a good use of taxpayers' money?
I think what I want to know is where's the climate plan and where's the taxpayer going to benefit from those that you use buses, those that use trains, those that use public transport. Where's the investment for that going to be?
Would you rather the money was put into that?
Of course.
Or?
I mean, I was in the North East this weekend. 25% of the people in the North East don't even own a car. How are they going to benefit from this subsidy? I hope it's not a gimmick. I hope it actually works, but it might be a step in the right direction. But I would prefer, like Andy Burnham in Manchester is openly talking for a bare version of the underground or overground or wherever. I would prefer that money was actually invested into public transport. That would actually get rid of emissions because less and less people would use cars if they could. If I lived in London, I wouldn't have to use a car. I could rely on public transport. You've got the underground, you've got buses, etc. So I would prefer it actually being invested in public transport.
Emily, do you want to respond to that? More money on public transport?
But there is more money going into public transport, plus we're taking buses out of privatisation and putting it back into control of the local people and the local council so they can choose the routes and choose the timetables that are going to work for their cities. Plus, we're renationalising rail. I agree with you. Public transport is absolutely part of the solution, but we've got to make sure that also those people that choose to drive have a green solution and that we get more solar farms. We've approved more solar farms in the last 10 months than was done in 14 years because solar has to be part of that solution. We've got to take those difficult decisions and sometimes unpopular decisions, but we have to put that investment, public transport, new forms of energy and making sure that people can make that just transition.
There are some bigger questions, though, about things like the grid capacity. There are, we talk about buses and saying, oh, that's great. There are green buses, there are electric buses, and there are problems with the grid connection, so that some of those buses have to be charged by generators because they can't, like diesel generators will then charge up an electric bus because there isn't the suitable connection, the grid can't cope. So there are much bigger conversations and there are bigger challenges for the government that have to be addressed. I think taking a step towards encouraging people, at the end of the day, everyone has to make some change or some step as well as the overall big picture stuff. So we do need incentives for individuals to make the right choices, to make better choices perhaps.
Do you think the government, do you think we can afford it?
Well,
£700 million?
I think the problem is, I mean, the questions about what can be afforded is a huge challenge. We know that, I think over the weekend we were at fever pitch about tax rises and where is the money coming from for anything. But my bigger concern is, yes, spend it on this if that's going to help. But don't forget that you can't say to people there's an alternative when actually the alternative isn't really green. You're saying it's an electric bus, but it's not running efficiently because there are still more infrastructure challenges that the UK has got that we're still not fully addressing.
Just to come back on Emily, I mean, I think we're in agreement that this is a positive step. But I don't think, and climate campaigners will also tell you, electric cars will not solve the climate change. I mean, what the problem is, they're resource intensive, so they shift the emissions from one place to another. Now, what we could also build our own cars, but we're not doing that as well. We're relying on Nissan. We're praying that Nissan don't leave Sunderland, and we're praying that Jaguar don't leave the Midlands where I live. Instead, we could be creating our own. That would mean better jobs, green jobs as well, more money into our own industries, more manufacturing. But again, my criticism of the government is that they came in saying we're not going to do sticking plaster politics, but subsidies and these sorts of things we should be actually doing things that will change.
But might they help those jobs, though? Because might they actually mean that more people think, I might buy cars from those particular
Yeah, exactly. If we're building our own as well.
But,
and that would
where
also...
we are building, at least if there is an incentive to buy because you're being given a little bit of help, perhaps it will help shore up those industries in the UK.
So just for one example, Milton Keynes is the home of Silverstone and F1 racing. A lot of the technologies that are coming through, and of course they're going fully green with biofuels and other materials like composites, and I've been to the manufacturing centres to see what they're doing. These are the sorts of things I would love to see come through to the new British vehicles. And this will mean that it's not just that they have to have a certain amount of energy because they're still on a steel car that's still very heavy and you need to use quite a lot. Composites is actually what will make it lighter, where you'll need ultimately less. We need all different kinds of solutions for all different kinds of people, and we need that British innovation being turned into British jobs and companies here.
Agree.
But one of the biggest challenges to UK manufacturing is high energy costs, and our energy costs are high because of all the subsidies and charges that are being put in to tackle the infrastructure issue. So the two things have to interact, which again comes back to the idea of pacing. If you force these things too quickly, it becomes very expensive in the short term.
But people will say that there's an emergency. Look at this BBC News headline. Extreme weather is the UK's new normal, says the Met Office.
Of course, but you have to remember this is a global issue. Our contributions are less than 1%. So as long as we're doing our fair and reasonable share, I'm afraid this problem is not solved by the UK. This problem is solved by China. It's solved by the industries of India in the future and how they choose to do things. There are other countries that are still not playing their role in terms of the weight of their emissions. And us going further and further and faster on that 1% is not really relevant if those other countries
keep doing more. Is that a fair point, that
more.
we're doing our bit but others aren't?
But we're outsourcing to those as well, so we are our about 1%. You're counting it here, but if you count it to what we're outsourcing to China and India, and when we do make these electric vehicles, they're going to be most likely being made in China, in Japan or China or whatever. So we're not counting that cost as well. So I don't think we're doing enough. We're doing good. We can be doing much better, and we should be doing our part. And I think again, going back to especially on transport. Public investment into public transport will cut emissions and it will take cars off roads, and it will do much better than subsidies and gimmicks like this.
And the reason energy costs are so high, because the investment in solar, onshore wind and all of that was cut, and actually we should fully develop it because they do become cheaper things. I absolutely agree with you. The grid is broken and we need to be looking at much more community energy, closed systems where, for example, I'll keep talking about Milton Keynes, I'm very proud to represent it, but our waste powers our electric vehicles in the council. So literally people's rubbish is powering the electric vehicles. And we need to look at much more solutions like that. So, and on top of that, micronuclear and other sorts of things. But pacing is starting to sound like a word of passing the buck or dragging our heels. And the reality is we need to be moving fast, and we are moving fast.
I know people don't like facts, but as I said, we were the fastest decarbonising economy in the G7 under our time in government. So this, how much faster is it that you want us to go ahead of everybody else at great cost?
Well, this is the sort of more difficult bit now, isn't it? Because we have to move into the next step.
We're doing our role. That's what I've always felt on this issue. We should absolutely be setting an example to others, and we do. And this argument that we should count the emissions of China. It's their manufacturing. I'll finish. It's their manufacturing. It's their factories. It's their profit. So they're the ones that have to deal with it, not us. Just because we buy a product off them, they're the ones that are making the money out of it. So it's for them to invest in the transition. And I'm afraid they're not doing that. They're still building coal-powered fire plants on a regular basis. So, as I said, I want us to do a good job on this issue. We have historically, and we should continue to do so, but not an ever-increasing burden to British taxpayers on a diminishing return when other countries are not playing their part yet.
So if it's costing the public money because of all of this, is that a fair point, that China needs to put its own house in order?
Which of course China does, and of course China has 1 billion people and India have 1 billion people, so it's gonna. But again, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, and the fact that Kieran says about the fastest decarbonising in the G7, has that got anything to do with the fact that we don't make as much as the rest of the people in the G7? That's why our decarbonising. Whereas we outsource most of the stuff that are meant to. We don't manufacture anything. Everything that comes from abroad. If we were manufacturing things and we did take into account how our emissions and everything is controlled rather than relying on China and others, I'm sure that statistic might not be great, but we would have control of what we're manufacturing and the emissions that come out of it.
It is part of it, but actually, for example, on wind, we have one of the biggest wind sources in the world. We had a huge investment. Offshore or onshore, it's still been providing a huge amount of power for our grid, which has enabled us to be on the journey to decarbonisation. So there's a mixture.
OK, let's talk about the possibility of a new political party. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, the former leader of the Labour Party, was asked about this by the BBC's Stuart Wincup this weekend.
Just you told a lot of cheers in your speech about talking about hope for a new party. Will there be a new party?
There's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of very active left independents out there. They're coming together. So there's going to be a new political voice and it's on its way.
Will you be involved in that?
Listen, mate, my life has always been involved in activities to bring about social justice and social change, so I'm not disappearing.
Well, this comes after the ex-Labour MP Zara Sultana tweeted about a week and a half ago. This is what she said. She said she was resigning from the Labour Party after 14 years. She said, Jeremy Corbyn and I will co-lead the founding of a new party with other independent MPs, campaigners and activists across the country. Join us, she says. The time is now. Mish, will you be joining?
Well, I think many people like myself who are right now politically homeless because of the drift of centre-left parties towards the centre-right, which is what's happening because Labour are mimicking Farage, whereas the Tories are joining Farage. It's about political representation, and millions like me feel that those people that are the most vulnerable should be protected by Labour, which they promised to do. I mean, I was on the NEC when Emily was a candidate and then obviously got elected, and if Keir Starmer said that he was going to keep children in poverty, cut pensioners' winter fuel allowance, if he was going to attack disabled people on their benefits, I don't think many people would have bought into that. So I do think that Labour has abandoned its base. I do think that it's time when politics is at the trust in politics is at all-time low. People like Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, people know what they stand for. They might disagree with them, that's legitimate to have disagreements politically, but they know what they stand for and they wear it on their sleeve, and they're not just going to...
Sounds like you might be tempted.
Of course I'm tempted, and if it's going to offer politics of hope and it's going to represent working class communities and it's going to help eradicate poverty and actually work towards it, then of course I'll be joining up.
Emily, you've abandoned your core vote.
I don't think we have. I think we're doing serious politics in serious times, and I would absolutely dispute what you were saying. The pensioners have had the biggest increase through the triple lock that they've had in their pension. We've brought children out of poverty before our child poverty report in terms of free school meals. That's over 100,000 children brought out of poverty. We're determined absolutely to have the same record that we had under the last Labour government, where we halved children in poverty, and we're working hard on the report to do that. But what I would say is this is really serious times. We talked about the military and our relationship and defence and our relationship with the US, what we need to do with France. We've talked about the big questions around climate change and the big decisions.
But are you worried
that
people will be tempted? They might be tempted to join.
They might be tempted, and I think, you know, some people like to hear they promised everything. You know, we've got a bunch of parties now that promise you anything, promise it won't cost you anything, it will be fine, you'll have your taxes cut and you'll get everything you ever wanted with a bow on top. But that's not the reality, and in fact that devalues politics.
Yeah, but the problem is that's exactly what Starmer did coming into the election. That's what the Labour Party did. I mean, I can see from the point of view of a left-wing voter, if you look at the pledges that Starmer made to become leader, I mean, my understanding is he's broken every single one of them. I mean, Nish not better than I, but most of them, I'm sure he's broken them. So many things that they said they weren't going to do in their manifesto and prior to the election, they haven't done them. That creates a problem of trust, and that leads to people feeling like they've got somewhere else they want to go.
OK, I'm joined now by Sophie Stowers, who can tell us a bit more about all of this. She's from the pollsters More in Common. Thanks for joining us. Is there an appetite for this kind of new party, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. So in some polling that we did, a hypothetical poll about 2 weeks ago, we saw that about 10% of people said they would be willing to vote for such a party. That's primarily voters who in 2024 voted for Labour and for the Greens. And we saw that play out in the 2024 election itself. You know, Labour's vote was under threat in areas like Bristol, I think most notably these urban city centres, quite young, you know, driven by Gaza, by Labour's moderation on welfare, on migration and things like that. So there is the appetite for it. I think there's two caveats to how we might see it play out in an election in 4 years' time. I think the first is there's a lot of competition for that same vote on the left, you know, from the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and other independent candidates. So that fragmentation could hinder such a party's ability to kind of pull voters towards it and unseat a Labour MP or whoever it may be. I think the other thing is that if the next election is a sort of competition between Reform and Labour, that's certainly how Labour, I think, are going to try and present it. To some voters, you know, who are dissatisfied on the left, who will vote for this party in other circumstances, are they spooked by the idea of Nigel Farage getting the keys to number 10, and do they return home to Labour? I think that's two unanswered questions.
So you touched there on who might be the losers if this party, which hasn't really launched properly yet, but if it was to be successful, who would be the biggest losers, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of the voters from kind of Labour's base in 2024 who would be attracted to such a party have already kind of made that shift. And quite often that has been to the Green Party, that they have been a real big beneficiary of that movement in vote. And we see that when we looked at that 10% who said, they will vote for such a Corbyn party, about 24% of them voted Green in 2024. Probably a lot of them have shifted towards that party since then too. So I think it really would hurt that party's electoral chances.
And to what extent can you assess how much Gaza is a driver for some of this?
Well, I think the kind of vote, and in terms of the salience of the vote, of that issue, to voters who have moved to the Greens and say they will vote for this party, it does tend to be higher for them than it does for other groups of voters. We see that voters who are more kind of been dissatisfied with Labour's approach on welfare, on their language around migration, it is a factor for them, but a lot of those voters have moved to kind of more moderate alternatives like the Liberal Democrats, or are unsure who they will vote for. So it certainly is a kind of key driver towards this new left-wing alternative.
And Jo, it's quite hard, isn't it, to set up a new political party? I mean, we've seen lots of people try and it hasn't always worked, has it?
Yeah, it has mixed success and it can often take a very long time. And in a way, there's something odd going on here in that group were already a group anyway because, they weren't part of the Labour Party because they'd been suspended. So we're sort of sitting angry and a bit fed up. And let's face it, we're never really part of the Keir Starmer project or whatever you want to call it because they were part of the group that were always annoyed, angry at perhaps some of the rule changes, some of the things, the modernisation that Keir had been behind. So to some extent, I'm not sure it's a huge concern at the moment for anyone. If anything, it just enables them to have rather than just an independent banner, they've got something else they can put themselves under. But in reality, there's a lot of work to do. And I can sort of see a situation where the likes of Corbyn just sort of drifts back to the odd Labour sort of thing behind him at certain speeches or at certain events. He's got a presence. He doesn't need a political party, let's face it. He can do enough on his own. He's got the name recognition. But he also had a failed attempt to do what Keir Starmer is doing. So I think ultimately this is just a group that will make some noise. I think to the point we made earlier about being in the room and having the conversation, though, they lose a degree of power by stepping away from the infrastructure that the Labour Party's got. Whether you think the Labour Party is that democratic anymore, it still does have a significant amount of democracy within it compared to some of the other parties. So they miss out by being out of the room and saying we're not even going to.
Do they become irrelevant if they set up a party?
I don't agree with that at all. I think that, first of all, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn would set up a party because he needs to set up a party. It's because there's a demand for a party. And you've seen from that poll that there is a hypothetical 10%. And that's without even the name of a party, without knowing who the party is going to be, to the left of Labour. I've seen polling privately, and it might be coming out this week, I don't know, that actually turbo accelerates that polling into something that Labour should be very worried about, which polling was done after the resignation of Zara Sultana was announced. I think Labour should be very worried. And what I would say is that there is way back for Labour from this, and that's if they fight for the people that they represent, if they fight for young people, if they fight for workers, if they fight for vulnerable people, and don't end up and visibly seeing that they're actually fighting for hedge funds to protect people from getting a wealth tax or weapons manufacturers and stuff. So it's really important that Labour actually heed that message, because I disagree with Jo on this as well. Seriously important Labour figures, if this polling carries on, and the polling that I've seen, will lose their seats at the next election. And I'm including even the likes of Keir Starmer losing to Andrew Feinstein, West Streeting losing to Leanne Mohammed, people like Shabana Mahmood and Jess Phillips losing their seats in the West Midlands. I don't think this is just something you can brush off or laugh off. This is a serious threat, and especially to Labour. That's because Labour are parroting what Reform are doing, especially on migration, especially on leaving communities behind in terms of the cuts they're making. It's really dire.
Emily, this is a real threat here. He's talking there about senior figures losing their seats.
I think there's a real threat to democracy at the moment. I think there is...
More democracy is not a threat to democracy. This is
no.
more democracy.
I'm not...
What is
let me finish my point here. I think there's a real threat to democracy because there is this sort of instant, we want everything instantly. There's sort of, where are the serious politics? And, you know, you have conversations about how which leader you'd rather have a drink at the pub with. I'm not worried about drinks at the pub with a leader. What I'm worried about is somebody who's going to look at the threat posed by Russia, the threat posed by Iran and other actors, the threat posed by China and North Korea, and say, this is how we protect our country, but also some of the upcoming threats. Online safety is a big issue for me. I want to be the leading country in the world on online safety.
But isn't the problem that a lot of your traditional backers, if you like, aren't really hearing that message? They're not liking what Keir Starmer has to say. If you look at this BBC News headline here, Labour not defending workers, says Unite after Rayner row. So this is Unite, you know, one of the biggest union backers of the Labour Party, you know, saying that they might not want to still be involved with the Labour Party.
Unite's a very interesting union. I've been a member and worked for the GMB, and they don't all behave like that. The reality...
Wow. Unite, your biggest donor,
they're not
questioning their behaviour when their members have voted through a political conference is quite
and that's the right that they have. They absolutely, that is a democratic right that the conference has. But I don't think, having listened to some of the discussions over the weekend, this is not a quid pro quo relationship. The Tories are always trying to show that we've got some union paymasters. No, we're a movement that defends workers. Now, we defend them in different ways and we come together, but it is not a quid pro quo relationship.
It's not the quid pro quo factor, it's the fact that it's a leading union that represents 1 million workers in the workplace, which is your base, actually saying that you're not doing things right, and instead of listening, you're saying their behaviour is odd because your union doesn't make such noise. I don't think that's the right response to either the union or its workers or its members or the people that they represent. It's not an individual who said this, it is a union who's come out and said this.
It's a union that didn't quite know who their members were, because hadn't Angela Rayner already quit?
Yes.
Well, if that's the truth, if you looked at her register of interest, it did say that she was still a member of that union.
I think the point is they're asking for her to... They're asking for her to intervene on an individual thing rather than working together on employment rights, with the biggest uplift of employment rights, end to fire and rehire, sick days for people who are working, rights for day one to not get fired. These are things that working people that you say that the Labour Party needs to listen to is absolutely delivering.
There's a strike in Birmingham right now where the Labour Council are actually, by cutting £8,000 to the pay packet of bin workers, these are key workers who we were clapping for during the pandemic, which is almost fire and rehire, because those bin workers, who can afford, I mean, even yourselves on greater salaries than the bin workers can't afford £8,000 pay cut, but how are you expecting them to do it and then say we want to end fire and rehire when those very bin workers are actually facing that same prospect of fire and rehire from a Labour council?
Emily?
I don't know the details, but I know...
You should know the details, because that is very important.
I do know the details.
When criticising Unite, that is very important.
Are you going to let me speak, or are you just going to keep talking over me? Because this is not the way you get people to listen to you, just yelling over them.
I think you need people to listen to yourself more than I do, because your seats are at very risk, and the very base you are targeting are the ones you are losing.
What I can say is when I was Deputy Leader of the Council in Milton Keynes, we had created a new contract because the old contract for the bin workers did not actually have any voice or listening to the trade union workers. We now have a trades council back in on bins, and actually it's going very, very well. I don't know what led to the breakdown in Birmingham. I wasn't a councillor there and I wasn't the leader, so it's not for me to comment.
OK, let's talk. There's another dispute. There's another dispute which I'm sure everyone will have a view about. The Health Secretary and the BMA are to meet in a bid to avoid strikes. This is resident doctors, formerly known as junior doctors. Is there a broader problem with Labour, that they are losing, you know, these are professional people who are not happy with what the government's doing?
Yeah, they're not happy with the pay offer that's been offered by the independent remuneration panel. As you know, when Labour came in, we said that independent remuneration panel would be the place that we would go to. We would respect it and we would fund what the pay was. And they got a 22% increase last time out of that process. This time they're not happy. What I would always say in these disputes is absolutely come back to the table, talk about it. talk about and negotiate. And that is what trade unions do on behalf of their members. It's also what employers do on behalf of their organisations.
Joe, disaffection, this has sort of got the theme of disaffection, hasn't it, amongst lots of people.
That's probably putting it mildly.
And so, you know, it's not just young people, but it can be. I mean, there is something going on here, isn't there, where people just feel that life is not affordable in many cases.
Yeah, and I think, you know, let's face it, even if you look at what happened over the welfare bill, you know, you've got MPs that were very unhappy that their own side were not listening to them. You've got a situation where, you know, groups were getting together and saying very, very forcefully that they were not happy about the direction that their government were taking and were very, very uncomfortable. So I think there is a sort of wider problem around, you know, whether you supported this government or not. There is a feeling that it's not going the way people thought it was going to go. There are plenty of people that are now looking and saying it feels like the expectations were talked up. The country's expectations were talked down too much, which probably has led to a lack of investment and probably a real drop in business confidence, as well as those national insurance contributions that they were hit with in the budget. But then you've got the general direction and the sort of policy direction and the communication of taking people on that journey. What does it mean? What's it going to lead to? Has meant that, you know, this session is sort of ending not really in great shape, to be fair, in terms of I think how MPs themselves feel. But the wider country is sort of waiting for when's it going to feel any different for me, because there are so many areas where people are unhappy.
And Kieran, that's been going on a long time. That is not just under this Labour government.
But I think the first thing I want to say is actually the BMA doctor strike is yet another example of Labour during the election campaign, just for political reasons, to put pressure on us, saying that all these things are just easy to be fixed. We're going to come in and we're going to fix them. A huge strategic mistake in saying to unions, we don't want strikes. We're going to stop strikes and we're going to do whatever it takes to stop strikes. Because, of course, they'll then take what you give them, and then you've put this huge political capital at risk by saying that the measure of your success was that you settled the disputes when we couldn't. We didn't settle them because we weren't willing to settle them at any price. But now the unions know that Labour are really up against it because they made such capital of us not being able to settle them, that then the unions will know that you really, really, really will do everything you possibly can to avoid strikes.
Emily, has it backfired?
And the final point, you said about you need to get back to the table, and you said that to us when we were negotiating with them, because we said we are not going to come and talk about pay, and that's exactly what Wes Streeting's done. Wes Streeting said, I'll talk to you, but I won't talk to you about pay. That's exactly what we said, and you spent all that time criticising us
Emily,
for it, and now you've done exactly the same thing.
So we did settle the junior doctors dispute. This is a new dispute.
Well, it's not settled, is it, turns out?
Well, they got a 22%.
And now they're going on strike again.
And now they want to take it for the next year even more. So my view is you do have to sit down. That's been my experience of working in the trade unions. That's actually how you get... That's how you get to a deal that works both for the NHS and for the young people who are building their careers in the health service.
But, last word with you. What do you make of this? There'll be lots of people looking at this, like the BMA, asking for a massive pay rise and saying,
I think it is interesting that when Boot was on the other foot, Wes Streeting was saying that doctors need to be paid, and now he's saying that doctors are being ungrateful. That is quite stark. But I do have to say that this is a culmination of not just the Labour government, but 14 years of Tory cuts where wages are frozen, wages haven't risen, and the cuts have been so real life that doctors and junior doctors who spend so much money to become doctors and so much time as well are not earning enough for them to continue the profession. So it's culmination of 14 years of Tories, and obviously Labour are now having to deal with it, but I would deal with it honestly and frankly and pay the doctors what
there we go, a plague on both your houses. We have to leave it there. That's all for today, but I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer.